This is the All Rev'd Up podcast, season 6, episode 6. I'm Reverend Emmett Price.
And I'm Reverend Irene Monroe.
Irene, before we jump into today's conversation on Juneteenth, let us thank each of our listeners and viewers. This 6th season is all because of you. Thank you for listening to us on the various podcast apps and for watching the actual live recording of the podcast on our YouTube channel. We are grateful for your support, your encouragement, your feedback, your reviews, and your comments. Thank you so much for sharing the podcast with others.
Yes, indeed. And a tsunami of thanks to our loyal listeners and our hearty welcome to our new ones. And I have to say, we couldn't be what we be without the creative genius of our producers, Kyla Wright and Cavante Smalls.
Absolutely.
Today's Juneteenth traditions. People share stories of that great day, have picnics, attend rodeos and baseball games, go fishing, and have fun with family and friends. Juneteenth is also a time to learn and celebrate new things. Many museums offer Juneteenth programs and exhibits.
On June 19th, 2021, Juneteenth, a commemoration of the emancipation of all the enslaved people in the United States, became a federal holiday. However, now, just 2 years later, in many places within this country, we cannot talk about, teach, or read about the history of this federal holiday because it makes many non-Black children feel bad. Laws such as the Stop WOKE Act, end quote, bans teachers from teaching lessons or holding class conversations that would make students feel guilt or anguish for the past actions committed by their race, end quote. So, Irene, how in the hell do we commemorate Juneteenth without acknowledging what we're commemorating?
Well, we're celebrating Juneteenth at the same time, witnessing the erasure of Black culture. Now, Juneteenth holiday is really symbolic. Do not confuse this with racial justice. And do not confuse this, too, that the GOP senators who voted to recognize finally the day of slavery has ended, still are doing nothing in terms of legislation for systemic change. So the fullness of freedom, I have to say, Emmett, is something that we as Black people have yet to experience. So I laugh at your opening because, I have mixed feelings. There's sadness. There's a level of pride talking about our tenacity, But the point is, the truth is that, yeah, we're being erased, and they don't want to hear about 250 years of slavery, followed by 90 years of Jim Crow, 60 years of separate and unequal. So, what I see here is that, yes, this is symbolic. We're seeing actually, this and that happening. We're seeing culturally erasure. And what that is to me, as I would define it, is really, to me, a deliberate act to sort of negate and suppress information. And I feel this way, Emmett, that if we don't manage our culture, the dominant culture will definitely do that. And so what we're seeing, I see three components operating at the same time as we're celebrating, that we're no longer, enslaved people. I'm seeing censoring, certainly with the banning of books, the commodification and commercialization of Juneteenth. What they do now, like Walgreens, they'll give you they'll slap on a banner, red, black, and green, and say Juneteenth, or they'll sell these Juneteenth banners, But in any capitalist society, they always try to profit on people's, pain, and then the disinformation, the whitewashing of it. I mean, we have yet to have an understanding of what reparation is, where critical race theory falls in, how we have venerated for so long Confederate soldiers with this lie of the lost cause myth here. So I just feel like this is what they did. We got to remember this contextually. 2020, George Floyd died. 2021, we get Juneteenth. Okay. So we get Juneteenth in lieu of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, okay? We also got the emancipation of Aunt Jemima. Now that's important on the pancake box, okay? Instead of, eliminating qualified immunity, And then last year, now let's hold up now, we get the Emmett Till lynching act. That's 68 years since he was lynched. But let us not forget Ida B. Wells, an
Hmm.
activist and a journalist who campaigned against lynching in the 1800s. So, it's it's
I
not even six of one and half a dozen of another.
No, I knew you was gonna give us a history lesson, and I want to invite all of our listeners, whether you are routine listeners or new listeners, to go back and find our episode on Juneteenth that we did last year, because I think there we did more of a historical notion of how we get here. But here, 2 years later from the announcement of this as a federal holiday, how do you go to a place where you have a federal holiday which has no gravitas now? Right, because you can't even teach the notion, you can't even teach the notion of why it's a holiday. When you go to the 4th of July, everyone
Hmm.
talks about Independence Day. Independence from what? There was a war, and you have this historical legacy by which
And
you have
enactment
independence.
too, and
Yeah,
enactment, because
but
we're
but
here in
yeah, but
Massachusetts.
how do
Yeah.
you deal with Juneteenth without talking about the heinous, enslavement of people,
Right.
the human trafficking, all of the abuse and trauma, the notion of actually creating a chattel slavery economy by which you
Okay.
have all the free labor that built this nation. How do you not talk about that? Because it's going to make white children feel bad about their legacy. What are you
Yeah.
talking about?
But you know what? The real truth is this. Robin DiAngelo talked about white fragility. It's really about adults feeling shame, guilt, and discomfort. Because if you talk to a lot of white children, you know, they don't know one way or the other about it. It's
Mhm.
it's a history lesson. It's sort of telling them about Columbus. Christopher Columbus. And Native.
1492 sailed the ocean
That's right.
blue. Yep. Hmm.
And I think that kids see, it's really about not only white discomfort, but what the paradigm shift would be around power here. I think kids coming up through grade school and high school and even college can be like, okay, we found some new information. You know what? The U.S. didn't start in 1620. It really started in 1619. And the interesting thing about that, and this is a generation of young kids who really understand the importance of reparation. I think the kids do. It's more about the power structure that be the GOP. And also we need to say, while we can point to the GOP and their sort of resistance around doing the kind of legislation that would bring equity in face of 250 years of slavery and all the stuff that followed after, we got to understand here that our freedom has never come easy, and not even these holidays. So this is a holiday that I think that has meaning as long as we continue to shape it.
But even this, Irene, you're talking about the GOP. You can't get to the GOP without talking about the Dixiecrats, right?
I know.
You still have to go to the historical legacy in which you had, all of these heinous activities that were done against other human beings, and you have to deal with them. I
Right.
appreciate, our opening clip was Juneteenth, all about the holidays from PBS 2020, trying to give kids something to grasp onto. But of course, Juneteenth becomes about
Yeah.
picnics. It comes about hot dogs and
Fishing.
hamburgers,
And
fish. Yeah, I mean,
oh, and wait, one other thing. Potato salad.
Oh, here you go again. I thought we left that potato salad back in the last
For
episode.
Memorial Day.
Oh, come on, Irene. You got to bring that back up. You already revoked my black card. You gonna do it
Okay.
again?
What I would like to see, that I wish in part of the history that they would actually show what that day really was like when
Hmm.
finally, that Galveston, Texas was actually free. And we need to honestly tell the truth about it, is that they did know that they were free, but there was no way that they could leave Texas. It
Hmm.
was intentional that they get in another harvest from their enslaved blacks before they let them free. I mean, because you got to look at harvest season is a certain time. They needed they needed their crops, and so that's the thing that we have to look at. That yeah, it's so problematic in terms of how they use black labor. And I think that when I think about Juneteenth, just personally, I'm glad there's a recognition of it, because when I look at that in relationship to when the emancipation was, finally, announced on, January 1st of 1863. We got to understand that took 2 years before we even got to 1865 because of the war.
But again, Irene, you know this history because you studied it, you've read up on it,
In the oral history, our
and
parents
our
and
our parents
elders
and
were,
grandparents have
yeah,
told the stories, and much of this, even you didn't learn in school. So, like, isn't the resolution and the
right.
notion of fixing this, so that we don't repeat history, is to be able to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, and allow folks to understand how this country became the nation that it is, right? Because you
Yeah.
can't you can't get back to,
Yeah.
make America great again, what, when we're
Right.
all enslaved again? I mean, so
Right. Right. But we're
Juneteenth
enslaved
becomes,
differently. Right. We're enslaved
well,
differently. Yeah. I mean, so no, we're not shackled, with these fetters here, but we're shackled by the censoring of it, the gentrification of Juneteenth. One of the things I just always want to make clear, because I know that there will always be some folks say, well, this conversation, makes me feel uncomfortable. I'm not saying, I'm not, and I think you would agree with me, Emmett. I don't think we're saying that white people or are irredeemably racist. We're saying that are you interested in reconciliation and redemption? And what it takes to get to that is to tell the truth about the history of this country. It actually would free them. And I always feel that when we tell this story, it's always so black and white, because we got to realize, other than John Brown, okay, there were some other white abolitionists, okay, other than the unnamed Quakers, and that's very intentional too. Who were these Quakers that were part of the Underground Railroad? There's an intentionality of the erasure of even the white people who were instrumental in helping us become, emancipated.
let's pick up here on the other side of the break. This is the All Rev'd Up podcast. We'll be right back.
Dear Black people, Juneteenth is our day. You don't have to feel any kind of way about white people not being included in Juneteenth, because they are included in Juneteenth as the descendants of enslavers. But Juneteenth should be about unity. Why? This country is not about unity. Juneteenth is an American holiday. If you're not going to teach true history in American schools, then don't come trying to take Black holidays and call them American holidays. The point is that Black folks can be all right celebrating a day for Black folks without feeling like we have to include other folks. I don't see Christians spinning dreidels for Hanukkah ads. Ba-dum-bum.
This is the All Rev'd Up podcast. We are back, and Irene, is Juneteenth a Black people's holiday, or is it an American holiday? Are we as Black folks being asked to be super inclusive when our great nation chooses to not be inclusive? How do we deal with this conundrum here?
Well, this is how I deal with it. This is not MLK Day, number one, where
No,
there's
you didn't.
where this is a day of service. Okay. And there is some history behind it, where I don't think that with this particular holiday, and it's early in its rollout years, because this is just what, year two. I think this is year two here. I think it's this. You and I are not going to go to work. Okay. That's one way how we going to do it. Okay. I'm going to have my potato salad, and I'm not giving you any, because I don't want to
Oh,
hear from you.
God.
I'm going to celebrate it the way that we have always celebrated, which is this. We would always sit around a picnic table. This is, and people who had migrated north from the South would come and tell how they came up here. And they would always get to, and such great grandfather was a slave. And they would sometimes talk about heirlooms that they still have, Bibles that they still have, pictures that they still have, names that they will name other children, because one person was named Hannah Jones. I'm using that, and they'll say Hannah Jones Williams. That was your great great grandmother who was born in slavery, but by the time she died was free. It's the stories, I have always said the oral history, I joke about it and say it's the Chitlin circuit. There's veracity in those stories, the truth about it. And so I will spend those days, now telling a younger generation, because I'm old enough to say, and this is what was told to me. And this is what I hope and strength that you get out of this story when you're having a bad white day, which will be many. And so that's it. We will laugh. We will play bid whisk. We will do the electric slide, and we will, in the face of the continued erasure of our culture, as in the face of when we were living in Jim Crow, we will find joy in this day with each other.
I love the generational piece here because when you talk about playing whist, bid whist, I play spades, right? And your generation would talk about, how y'all had to walk to school
That's
all
right.
these miles and carrying your
That's
lunch
right.
pail, right?
That's
Where my
right.
generation had a bus and we had a lunch box, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
I
Right.
love the interplay of the generations because the generation before you had their narrative too. And
That's
as
right.
we pass these generations on, I think you're absolutely right. The problem that I have with this, though, is not what you said, is where you started. How in the world do we get from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who gave his life for this
Mm-hmm.
nation, to now it being about Black people serving as if we ain't served enough?
That's right.
We have
And that's
built this
that's right.
nation on our backs. We have not been paid for it, which is why your conversation about reparations. And yet on MLK Day, every January, we
Is
are
it?
expected to go volunteer as if we don't volunteer every day.
Wait. We done volunteered for 250 years.
Yeah,
We
that's what
didn't
I'm
even
talking about.
volunteer. Yeah, we're forced to. Yeah. So no, I mean, so my point is that it doesn't have. There's a kind of freeing element to it. It really is in this way, because there's no speech that we as a people will one day overcome. No, it was no. There was the announcement, the reading of the Emancipation. You were
Mhm,
free, and the thing about it, at that moment, now we had to make some choices,
mhm.
because it's not like many of us could say, okay, let's just go now and start a new nation. But in many ways we did. We went and looked for our family. That's why we're together on family. So
Yeah,
there was a meal. We
yeah,
took what we had on our backs and left those plantations. So that's why we have a number of free cities. This is why so many of us, after emancipation, our last name was not our slave master's name, but we would be Irene Friedman, Emmett Friedman. Okay, I mean, so it's the way in which we created a nation within an oppressed nation. And one of the things that was always central was family. And it's whether it is blood kindred, or we have these aunts that are not aunts and uncles that are not our blood aunt, but it's about getting together and understanding that in struggle there's Black love, because
yeah,
we love each other,
yeah.
and that there's Black joy. And so again, I get back to my potato salad.
You and your potato salad. But let me suggest this because I think you're onto something. If non-Black people can stop being so fragile about what you feel you're being blamed for and understand the gift of the resilience of Black people, and understand that even when our families were ripped apart, our
Hmm.
desire to be together can be a stimulus and to be an inspiration to unity in this nation. And even though we were oppressed and traumatized, whether you want to admit it, acknowledge it, or read about it or understand it or not, really doesn't matter, because it's where we find our strength. That
That's
if that
right.
happened before and we survived through it, no matter what you put in our face, we're strong enough, we're bold enough, we're courageous enough, we're powerful enough to deal with any and everything. So
We have no choice. Hmm.
as this
Hmm.
last stronghold of white supremacy comes and looks us in our eye, we'll look you back in the eye and
Hmm.
say no more.
Hmm. We've been here before. Yeah. We've been here before, Emmett.
On that note, let me offer this final word. On January 20th, 2021, poet Amanda Gorman, who was 22 years old at the time, offered her poem, The Hill We Climb, at the inauguration of President Joe Biden. In this work, she called for unity and collaboration. Yet 2 years later, this work was banned in Florida by the petition of a parent who never even read the work. In the opening of Gorman's work, she asked the question, when day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? I wonder if she knew that her brilliant work would be banned in Miami-Dade County, as it apparently contains, in quote, hate messages. Along the same lines, poetry by American legend Langston Hughes has also been banned, which is ironic since much of Hughes's poetry laments not being seen, heard, respected, or appreciated as a citizen of our great nation. Hughes always held out that those who were white supremacists or supporters of white supremacy would one day see how beautiful I and my history are and be ashamed, as he just suggested in his poem, I Too Sing America, first published in 1926. People of all ethnicities, genders, expressions, people of every nation and tongue. People, can we stop all the hatred, fear, and division? Can we just stop with the laws banning intellectual property that you haven't read just because it was created by a black person or a queer person or a trans person? Can we just stop? That's it. Just stop. Ashe.
Ashe.
And amen.
Amen.
All Rev'd Up is brought to you by us, the Revs. Our amazing producers are Kyla Wright and Cavante Smalls.
Music for this episode is from Reverend Price's son and musical prodigy, Emmett G. Price IV. All Rev'd Up is distributed by GBH.
Additional thanks to Bob Kempf, Elizabeth O'Brien, May He, Devin Robbins, Meredith Neerman, and Zach Waldman.
If you like what you hear, let us know. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts and follow us at All Rev'd Up Pod on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.
Feel free to send us a note, a question, or a comment to allrevduppod@gmail.com. We'll be back